Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our cloud infrastructure panel here at Define Tomorrow. I hope you're really enjoying the content throughout the day. If you're watching this later on YouTube or any other channel, make sure you check out all the other content on the Computer World YouTube channel. Today is all about helping you understand your future journey with the infrastructure, what's happening inside your data center and where it's moving to the cloud. And this session is all about the cloud, the journey, and where you're going. I would like to introduce the panelists for this session. First of all, Ben Evans.
Hi Barry, yeah, as Barry said, my name is Ben Evans. I'm the pre-sales manager here at Computer World.
Pete Cullen.
Hi there, Barry. I am Pete Cullen. I am the technical consultant for Azure with Computer World.
Fantastic. James Marshall.
Hey, how's it going? I am the UK Azure sales lead for our unmanaged or our SMB business in Microsoft.
Fantastic. And finally, Tom Button.
So I'm a senior Azure pre-sales engineer for Inti. We're an indirect CSP and a partner of both Microsoft and Computer World.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining us. We're going to try and have this a bit of a laid-back session, a bit conversational. So I've got a number of questions to go around the room, but just to get us started, why don't I ask you just to introduce yourself? If you've got an interesting fact you'd like to share with the audience, please feel free. And if you can be found on social media or any other platforms, and I suspect James has probably got an interesting story, judging by what's behind him, then please feel free to share. But let's start with Ben Evans.
Yeah, so I've been in the IT industry for around 15 plus years now. So yeah, I've been knocking around a little while. The last 7 of which have been here at Computer World. And for the last 2 years, my sort of primary focus has been on learning and getting up to speed with Azure and helping their customers go on that Azure journey, which is what we're here to discuss today. So an interesting fact about me. During lockdown, I rediscovered my love of Lego. So as you can see, I've got the Land Rover in the background that was built throughout the 3rd or 4th or whatever it was lockdown earlier this year. And as it's now December, it's okay to talk about Christmas. So my second favourite Christmas film is Home Alone. So when I seen this, I just couldn't resist buying it, which was, hopefully you can see that on the camera, this Lego set. So that's going to keep me occupied for the next couple of weeks or months, being realistic. In terms of social media, I'm on LinkedIn. I do have a Twitter account, which isn't as active as it probably should be. And that's it for socials, I think.
Brilliant. I'm very jealous, Ben. Pete, do you want to do a bit of an introduction to you?
Sure. Yes. So I've been in the IT industry for 27 years now. Primarily focused with infrastructure, starting off with NT4 and working all the way through there. So I've been working with Azure for the last 4 years, and I've just recently joined Computer World a few months ago as the technical consultant for Azure. I have racked my brain, but I cannot think of anything fascinating to say. But I'm also very, very envious of Ben's Lego set, which looks fantastic. Social media wise, you can find me on Twitter. I use the handle Azure Dad, so I'm Dad Azure on Twitter, and on the web soon to be I'll be azuredad.cloud.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Pete. And I'm very jealous of the bio behind you there. I've had many over the years, and I've promised my daughter to get another fish tank this winter. So we'll be looking into that again.
This is the second batch of fish because we haven't had it for too long, and I killed the first lot. So
probably less said about that, the better. Thank you for joining us. James, would you like to give us a bit of an intro and tell us a little bit about the wonderful room you're in?
Well, so yeah, I've been at Microsoft 11 years, and in that time, I've had a range of different roles and focuses, from pre-Office 365, working in our education team before it was even called Office 365, all the way through to selling Surface and Windows to our managed customers, and most recently, and of course now, focus very much on Azure and helping our SMB customers achieve their transformation goals and our partners be super successful with everything that Microsoft Azure has to offer. And that is a lot of stuff, by the way. There is a huge amount that can be done with all the services that make that up. And you're right, the room has an interesting story. This is my shed in my garden, which I built pre-COVID, not thinking that it would become my full-time office. But over the months, it's kind of evolved from shed with a desk to now my studio, where I do my work calls and events like this. But then in the evening, in my spare time, I stream on Twitch. I'm a big gamer, and so I enjoy playing things like Sea of Thieves and other bits and pieces online. So that's how that's through lockdown. That's kind of where I invested my time and effort was building out my studio, which is a slippery financial slope, let me tell you. But by way of finding me online, I'm everywhere as James B. Marshall. Whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you search, just James B. Marshall, and you'll find me.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. I feel that having you on the panel is going to be expensive for me as I spot all the different things in the background. And yes, my journey to continue to update my home study continues. Thanks for joining. Tom, would you like to do a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, no problem at all. So my focus has primarily been infrastructure as a service, working with SMB customers. I'm certified Azure Virtual Desktop Specialist, which is a very, very popular product that we're seeing at the moment. Obviously, with the introduction of Windows 365 as well, we're having a lot of conversations with partners around both solution stacks, considering the new world that we're now living in. With regards to an interesting fact about me, what's interesting about me? Okay, before I got into the world of IT, when I left school, I was in that position of I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I went for an interview for a gas engineer position. I don't know why I did that at the time. Anyway, went through the interview process, no issue. And at the end of the process was that you have to do a colorblind test just to make sure that everything's okay on that front. And I thought, yeah, no problem. I can see red, blue, and green, not a problem at all. Anyway, went to this test and I thought that they were having me on because I couldn't see any of the numbers and any of the formations of color. And it turned out that I'm severely colorblind. So yeah, interesting fact about me.
Wow. So best concentrate on the cloud, not get you to wire the RJ45 cables then.
Yeah, that's why everything's black and white behind me, because that's all I can see apparently. So
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Tom. Right, let's get straight on with the content then. And Pete, we're going to come straight over to you. So lots of customers at the moment are considering what does their future of their infrastructure look like. Many customers are maybe already on the start of a cloud journey, dabbling with some technology. Others are maybe fully in the data center, but they've got in their minds, they've got a cloud first journey now moving ahead. The next refresh is going to be moving to the cloud. So how do you recommend that customers start a public cloud journey? And maybe to the rest of the panel, once Pete's gone, please feel free to jump in and expand upon that.
Yeah, really, I think any company when they're starting out on a cloud journey, whether they're as you said, whether they're on-prem already or already starting to dabble, really the key thing is to look at the key benefits to your business for moving. So why do you want to move? What do you hope to achieve? From a business perspective, because it's very easy to rush and throw everything into the cloud, and then that's where a lot of perils and pitfalls sort of happen. So really, I would say if you're a new business and you're starting from scratch, then that's fantastic because you can start small and build your way up. You can start with some M365 stuff and then look into Azure as well. And you can start small with like a small blueprint, that kind of thing, and sort of build your services from there. If you're if you're fully on premises already, and you're thinking, right, I want to start to take some of my workloads to the cloud, see what workload would be best for you. Are you going to be shifting things like SQL or IIS services, things like that, stuff which traditionally has been on-prem, which doesn't necessarily need to shift lock stock as it is. You can use Azure Migrate to be able to do things such as take an IIS workload and have it go into an app service, that kind of thing. Do you need to keep your SQL? Would you like to maybe think about having that as the hosted SQL offering on Azure? So really, it starts with what the business wants to achieve and what's best for your company.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, I think it's important to note that there isn't a one size fits all approach, nor is there a rule book that says you must move everything to the public cloud all at once. We have these conversations with partners and customers all the time around why not utilize Azure Active Directory for identity purposes first, and then use Azure for backup and disaster recovery, or store archive data in the cloud, you don't have to move everything all at once. And in fact, taking that smaller step first often will give you the necessary hands-on experience to develop your skills further without diving headfirst into the unknown.
Yeah, I just sum up really what Pete and Tom have said is, start with your strategy, have a really good strategy, understand what it is you're trying to do, why, what you're looking to achieve from it, and get that documented and supported from the business. And then from that strategy, build out a really good plan. And like Tom alluded to, there's going to be many different ways of doing things. What is the best service to use in Azure to meet your business requirement, and build that into your project plan and make sure you're getting a good understanding of what is available in Azure, because there's hundreds of services. What's the best fit for your organization and the key deliverables you need to give back, and build that into that adoption plan. So there needs to be a good amount of planning and understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve before you even start deploying your first resource into Azure.
Definitely. I think from me, the journey to server virtualization was quite an interesting one, where lots of people did it the same way, and it was that lift and shift where you very quickly moved physical servers to virtual servers. So I think there can be a misconception when it comes to the cloud that very much you're going to do the same thing. Like you did a P2V, you might be doing a V2C, and you're going to move it all over to the cloud, all into Azure, and it's going to be an overnight thing. I think from my perspective, that breaking it down, bite-sized chunks, having a plan, aligning it to the business as well as the infrastructure is really important. What's interesting to me, James, from your position inside Microsoft and working with Azure on a daily basis, what challenges do you often see customers coming across on that journey to the cloud, and how can they be avoided or overcome?
I think, your example of that transition years ago from physical to virtual, there's echoes there of some of those challenges for the cloud, in as much as I think people, the best way I can describe it is a bit like when you go to move house, and it's a house you've lived in for 10, 20 years, however long. We've all got in our loft rubbish that we've accrued over the years, stuff that we just had completely forgotten we had, or there's bits around the house that we probably would throw away if we were to be really objective about it, but they just hang around, little ornaments or old magazines, whatever it might be, right? And when it comes to moving house, you could put all of it in the back of a van, take it with you, and put it in the new house. But of course, then you're not actually really dealing with the problem. You're just you're just making more and more and more stuff, and it just gets bigger, and the mess gets bigger and bigger. I think that's part of the challenge that people face when it comes to moving to the cloud. It is a bit like moving house, and they have to face up to the prospect of dealing with some of that technical debt that they have up in the loft, those old applications that they have, or older versions of operating systems, or whatever it might be, that might be blockers in some cases to them starting, because maybe it's sufficiently old that it can't be run out of a public cloud environment, or they have to face up to the opportunity to modernize, which is say, hey, look, we have these line of business applications, or we have this data, or we have this process. We could move it as is, but actually that's not going to be the most cost effective, because moving it as is very expensive. Let's actually see how we can re-architect it, modernize it a bit, make it automated, more efficient, or whatever. So I think the challenge in summary is, how do you deal with that technical debt, that virtual loft that you have of old stuff, and how do you avoid just simply trying to move it from A to B?
Yeah, I do completely get where you're coming from on that. Is when I have conversations with customers, a lot of the time they're trying to repeat sometimes what they're doing on-prem in Azure, and that's sometimes not the best way to go around about these types of migration projects. And customers are always keen to understand what the cost would be involved in doing this. But it's about understanding that different mindset that cloud is. So Azure is very much consumption based. You pay for resources as you consume them. So when you're dealing with an on-prem environment, typically you're seeing things, size for peak, things run 24/7 because you've made that capital investment in that hardware. If you just try and do what you're doing on-prem in the cloud, then it's probably not going to be the most cost-effective solution for you. And there's so many more services and features and functionality that you can adopt as a business and organization, and you can get some real value delivered back in terms of cost efficiencies and savings.
there's these words that pop up from time to time, and we use them like we've always used them. And for me, technical debt is a word that I've started hearing regularly in conversations. But certainly for me, 5 years ago, that probably wasn't a word that was being used that much, kind of thing. It was that was just IT. It was all the systems that we collected over the years that were just kind of amalgamated together and moving forward, kind of thing. So that challenge of overcoming the other word that I tend to use that kind of equals the same thing as business as usual. How can you get away from business as usual because your technical debt is so probably unreliable, takes so much of your time that actually you're struggling to move forward? So I think this does require a shift in thinking. It isn't a shift of workload from A to B. The cloud is about more than just the location where your virtual machines are running, aren't they? It's about thinking in a different way. I don't know, James, whether you have any sort of opinions on kind of the different mindset you need with cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It is a completely different mindset because this isn't moving to a public cloud isn't just a technology led decision. It's not just something that is independently decided on by the IT department within an organization anymore because of its potential, because of its impact on many different areas of a business. It has to be a collaborative conversation across a business to say we could achieve more, whether it's reducing costs. That's always a favorite for people, is that they want to improve efficiency by reducing costs. Maybe it's ability to do better research and development, to attack new markets, or to improve security, and there are all different areas that go beyond IT. And so that mindset shift of IT as a necessary evil that we have to have in order to do business, to suddenly IT as an enabler. Actually, what more could we do in the cloud? What new insights could we unlock, or what velocity could we increase by doing this in a public cloud way or in a hybrid cloud way? I think those are important areas to consider, as I say, beyond just the IT piece. Because if you go at it just from an IT angle, you'll see success, but there's a whole bunch of unrealized potential that you leave behind if you don't make it a wider conversation.
Definitely, no, certainly some really good points there. So one of the areas that I often see, I'm a big advocate for the IT community. I'm heavily involved with things like user groups and Twitter. One of the areas of concern that I see coming up quite often, and this is twofold. One is it's by techies that want to give Azure a go, want to give other public cloud services a go. They put their credit card in, and all of a sudden they end up with a horrible bill that ends up kind of not sitting well with them. But equally, those that they've been used to purchasing big, heavy bits of tin, putting them in a data center, getting the sign off for that, and then that's then done for the next 5 years over and above their support and subscription. How do customers need to become comfortable with this change in the way of purchasing, control costs, manage costs? I don't know, Tom, if there's an angle that you could cover on this.
Yeah, no problem. And I think it is a massive change of mindset going from a CapEx to OpEx model. And I mean, from an Azure perspective specifically, costs can be quite daunting, although realistically they don't need to be, especially when you work with a proficient partner like Computerworld. In terms of areas to consider and areas that I typically discuss with partners and customers is the optimization piece and also the native tools that you have available to yourself, like cost management. So when we look at optimization, we look at naturally the whole estate in its entirety, but the first port of call is always the virtual servers, as normally they are the most expensive workload in the estate. So I mean, at a high level, not going into too much detail, the couple of things that we would consider are, and this has already been mentioned, but those virtual machines, are they running 24/7? And if so, do they need to be? Are they only being used for 7 to 8 hours a day? And if that's the case, why are you paying for those virtual machines to be running all day if they're not being utilized? If you have a workload which is running all day, maybe a domain controller, which realistically you're not going to turn off, are you paying for this on a reservation? Have you committed to Microsoft to receive the discounts that you potentially can? There's things that you can do alongside the subscription to make those costs more predictable and more affordable.
I think you're right. There's definitely tools in the box to help clamp down on ongoing costs. I mean, you mentioned reservations there and things like that, which absolutely I would encourage anybody to look at. I think there's another side to it as well, which is when you start your journey with Azure, particularly, you get access, you get the keys to the kingdom, you get access to the Azure portal, and you could end up spending a huge amount of money because nothing really out of the box is off limits to you. You can go and spin up an IoT hub, you can go and spin up a virtual machine, you can go and create your own data lake, whatever you want to do. And that's where permissions and governance and policy come in, because as much as it's important to look at, hey, as you say, we have these domain controllers, they've got to run 24/7, let's clamp down on cost by using reserved instances and control it that way. There is also that case to say, we don't want our users who have access to this portal to be able to go and create anything they like. We need to put in place some rigor to actually limit access to certain people. So rather than allowing every IT person to just go carte blanche, do what they like, having, using the policy and governance tools that are baked into the platform and those permissions capabilities to create the environment that says, if you need to spin up this particular environment to solve a business challenge, like, here is the blueprint for what that looks like, here are the allowed workloads that you're allowed to run, and that's all you're allowed to do. That has a massive impact on cost control, because you don't then have that awful nightmare scenario where somebody accidentally spins up something that's very, very expensive, forgets to switch it off, and at the end of the month you find that you've got a massive bill on your hands because they forgot all about it. You can avoid that completely by using those controls, absolutely to your advantage from day one, and embedding that culture of, responsibility and accountability for the resources that get used, and putting in place the right audit processes to make sure that there are no, random resource groups full of resources that are ticking away that aren't being used, and that kind of thing.
Tom, I think you had another point on this subject.
Yeah, so another point is around Azure Cost Management, which is natively available within the Azure portal. And it's not actually commonly used from the partner base that we speak to. And it's a fantastic product, which is available for you to view for free. You can use it to monitor cloud spend with optional filters. You can set budgets. You can set alerts against not only your actual cost, but also your forecasted costs. So if we take an example, let's say your internal IT team has £1,000 a month budget to spend on Azure infrastructure. Well, what you could do is set that as a budget in Azure Cost Management within the portal, and then subsequently set alerts alongside that. Let's say 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100% of your monthly budget. So £250, £500, £750, and £1,000. Now, whether that alert is an email, a webhook, an SMS message, it's completely up to you as to what that notification looks like. But if you've surpassed 25% of your budget and you're receiving that notification on the 3rd of the month, then you'll likely want to investigate as to why that is. So you don't just have to wait for the bill at the end of the month. You still can monitor that throughout the month.
So what I'm hearing here is much like the approach to cloud. As long as you've considered, as long as you've looked at the options that are available to you, there's no reason why you shouldn't have visibility and control when moving to the cloud. The real challenges for me seem to come about where there is a knee-jerk reaction to move something to the cloud, where it is a non-considered, non-process followed movement. And another area that I'd like to go on to now, and I don't know, Ben, maybe if you could start us on this, from my perspective, security in the cloud is something that going back a few years, there was lots of concerns about people not wanting to move to the cloud because is it secure? Is it a good place to be? And what I'm seeing from my side is almost the cloud and the services, certainly that Microsoft are putting around it, seems to really be saying that there's actually more benefits to securing your data in the cloud. I don't know if you want to just start a conversation around security in the cloud and some considerations.
Yeah, so the way I like to look at this is security is kind of moved. And what I mean by that is when we have physical data centers on-prem, the typical security boundary is my perimeter network. So I have a firewall securing my environment, protecting my workloads. But now with things like public cloud services, remote working, it's now shifted to identity. So identity is kind of the new security principle. It's about protecting that user account and who I am and what I can do with access control and permissions and things like that. And it's important to consider, lots of organizations out there use Azure Active Directory for their identity source across multiple, SaaS-based solutions, Azure on-prem stuff already. And Microsoft get a lot of telemetry data from this, which they can then feed into their bigger systems, talking things like Sentinel and identity protection. And they get, millions, billions of logons a day. So they've got a huge amount of data to do analytics on and give you some really valuable insights into the threats that are out there in the real world. And to me, it's going to be extremely difficult for an organization on their own to kind of replicate that themselves and do a better job in-house. And I know Microsoft spend lots of money and throw around to billions of dollars a year on security. So yeah, it's definitely having a look at where your security boundaries need to be and focusing on the right areas rather than having that mindset of it needs to be something physical, I think is the way to look at this moving forward.
Yeah, and you're absolutely spot on around the telemetry piece and the scale. There's an individual organization cannot on its own match the scale of telemetry and insight that a hyperscale cloud provider like Microsoft has. That goes without saying. However, it's important to remember that cloud is secure, but it's a shared accountability model, in as much as you could have Fort Knox in the cloud, but if you leave the front door open, then it's just like having no security at all. And I think one of the areas that customers often don't place enough emphasis on is thinking about that shared accountability model. You can build an insecure cloud environment just as easily as you can build a highly secure cloud environment. And it's about which of the technologies you use at the right time and how you use them to do that. And there's loads of guidance and loads of documentation and loads of help to give you the best leg up to have that right environment. But it's not the case to say, hey, we're in the cloud now, like everything's taken care of. And this is where I think IT departments need to think about that opportunity. Is it's a chance to upskill or retrain existing IT ops folks to say, hey, we might be in the cloud now, like we might have moved from managing physical apparatus to now managing a cloud, but actually this is where we now need to apply your skills, is keeping us secure, keeping a handle on cost, keeping a handle on process and diligence. So it is a paradigm shift in the way we think about security, from being a perimeter that we control entirely and we're responsible for as IT folks on-prem, to now working interoperably with the capabilities of a cloud environment.
I think it's really interesting to see where Microsoft are going with a security perspective. From my side, Microsoft seem to be turning themselves into a security company. We seem to be seeing lots of advantages, and I see with things like Azure and also the modern workspace components it being really quite interesting. I'd like to kind of change the conversation slightly and talk about the benefits of moving to the cloud. I don't know if Pete, if you want to take this first of all, so maybe you could talk about the benefit for IT in terms of moving to the cloud.
Yeah, certainly for an IT department, you're no longer having to maintain all of your existing on-premises infrastructure. You're not patching you're not firmware patching your SANs. You're not doing any work on on-premises hardware, no servers, no anything like this to do. When you're fully clouded, you've people sometimes, especially operations people, can be a little bit afraid of the cloud, but it's just a change in your skill set. There's so much. The cloud makes your life a lot easier. And anyone who's been in IT for a while will know that you want your life to be made easier, and you want your customers to be able to actually the people you're supporting to be able to work properly. And so this certainly for an IT department, having everything in Azure does make things a lot easier. You've got a lot less. There are less things that you have to look after and maintain and run and that kind of thing, definitely.
Ben, what are your thoughts on this subject?
So I think it's important to remember public cloud, especially Azure, allows you to unlock things that are very difficult to achieve on-prem. So the biggest example of that is the elasticity that you can offer in Azure. So a very brief story. Obviously, this morning I was tasked with getting up at 6 a.m. to go and book a delivery slot for Tesco at 6 a.m. when they were released for the Christmas shopping. So that was fun. However, it was a great example of how cloud's used to their advantage, because they would need to scale massively, because I was in a queue and I was number 25,000 and something. But what was interesting for me is the first 10 minutes, you could see obviously think about the platform scaling in the background, and the numbers started to go down slowly. And as that platform grew out and grew out and grew out horizontally to deal with the load, the queue dropped really, really rapidly. But what that means for someone like Tesco is they've only paid for the resources that they're using for those 2 busy hours this morning. To kind of, trying to repeat that on-prem would have taken a massive amount of capital just to run those servers for the 2 hours that was needed that time. And that's true for all retail, especially with things like Black Friday coming up. So that's some of the real power that you can get in Azure.
I think there can be a number of benefits, and certainly from a user perspective, when we're talking about infrastructure, we don't always consider the user, because at the end of the day, this is techie stuff. This is virtual machines, this is servers, this is networking. But one of the benefits that I see is hopefully sort of increased uptime, increased performance, hopefully maintenance and things like that can be handled in different ways. I don't know, James, if you've got a specific angle as to how the cloud can benefit the users.
Yeah, I think for the user, for the end user, that is non-IT, just regular user of technology, cloud done right should be completely transparent. You shouldn't necessarily even notice, or if anything, you should notice an improvement to the way that you work, whether it's being able to access those key apps or key company data from more places more easily, or whether it's simply performance, being able to execute business operations, whether it's running a query on data, or whether it's accessing a bunch of files, whatever it might be. Cloud offers the ability to make that a much more reliable, smooth, quick experience. And as I mentioned a second ago, crucially, in more places and from anywhere, whether it's, for example, using a service like Azure Virtual Desktop to be able to take the complete environment of everything you need and access it from any internet connected device, or be able to apply security in a way that makes it easier for people to authenticate using passwordless technologies, for example. The cloud should only positively impact the end user, and as I say, in a way that is largely transparent, because the end user is not awed by the fact that they're now running a virtual machine in an Azure data center, but they are awed by the fact that it takes them 20 fewer seconds to get that data query back from their Excel pivot update or whatever it might be. So there are huge benefits in terms of time saved, operational efficiency, and frankly satisfaction. Like, we've all been there, we've all had terrible IT service, and it's often because there's things creaking in the background that just really should be modernized, aren't built to scale automatically. And that example about Tesco's is a fantastic one. There are many examples where systems built for the cloud just elastically increase their compute capability and reduce it when it's not needed, and that makes the end user experience hugely better.
Definitely, it's always good to kind of bring these back to the kind of the business and the users to understand where those benefits are coming from, and certainly an area sort of, there's other ones with things like security. It can only be seen to be negatively, it often be seen to be negatively impacting the user. But things like passwordless that you mentioned there, James, is a prime example where potentially it could be more secure and more user friendly. So we've got to look for those benefits in these projects. So let's move on a bit now. So let's move on to those customers that maybe are already on their Azure journey. They've kind of got their workloads there. They're stable. They're happy. What's going on in the cloud is working well for them. How would you recommend that people mature their cloud journey? What comes next after kind of rationalizing their virtual machines, moving some workloads, maybe moving some things to platform as a service with SQL and things like that? But they've got their virtual machines there. What should people do next? Who wants to lead with that question?
I can jump in there quickly. So for me, I think the first consideration would be to run an optimization, both from a technical and commercial perspective, and working with a partner such as Computerworld, you'll be able to do just that. Post optimization stage, it then depends on where said customer is in their digital transformation journey. Did they re-platform into Azure by essentially just lift and shifting? And if that's the case, could they look to modernize their infrastructure, i.e. have they just rebuilt what they have on-premise into Azure? Are they using RDS, but within Azure? Could they look at Azure Virtual Desktop, for example? If they've moved a SQL Server from on-premise into Azure and they're just running that on a virtual machine, could they look at Azure SQL, managed instances, Azure SQL Database? Could they look to automate further? the possibilities are, I wouldn't say endless, but pretty endless, to be honest. So yeah, lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is that whole optimization piece. And I think there's the we say the term digital transformation journey quite a lot. In some ways, I think it's a journey that will never end. There'll always be ways to iterate and improve. And I think as you get more comfortable that your environment is well optimized, or you maybe have done that basic refactoring to allow that application to use a platform service rather than a traditional database hosted on a VM or something like that, as you exhaust through those low-hanging fruit opportunities to improve, it then becomes about seeing, well, actually, how do we unlock new insights into the business by using more of the data platform capabilities? How do we automate great swathes of our workloads by using logic apps and low code, no code solutions? How do we expand beyond Azure into the world of the Power Platform, for example, and start to improve not just the IT operations processes, but business processes off the back of that? There's a whole world beyond just simply clamping down the cost or improving the security posture that is opened up once you've kind of done those, and they can be done in parallel. It's about bringing in the right expertise at the right time. But I think, you mentioned about it being endless. I think it will only continually evolve. And that's, by the way, when you look at Microsoft's roadmap and things like what we announced at Ignite recently, and all the things that are coming down the line, there is always more coming to enable people to do and to achieve more. So as I say, it never ends, really.
Definitely. I think it's, as you say, it's never ending. For me, it's the ability to make something simpler, make something easier, make it a better experience. I've certainly enjoyed exploring things like, is it Terraform and Azure Automation recently, looking at the ways that you could very simply create something that would otherwise take a large amount of time, make it repeatable. Not only, well, yeah, I could go to Azure, click a few buttons, create a virtual machine, roll it out from that perspective. But if I'm able to do it with code, I can then repeat that. I can rip it up and take it down. If it goes wrong, then I can just create a new one. So I think there's a lot of really good options. And for me, the first part of the journey is kind of you're building the foundations. You're kind of getting ready for that future of possibility. And it's there where you decide to take that possibility that's important. So in the final few minutes here, what I thought we'd just do is a quick fire round. I'm going to go round the room very quickly. Hopefully, James, just one last question from you. So what is your favorite Azure learning resource, and what was the one top thing announced at Microsoft Ignite?
Oh man, favorite learning resource is easy. Microsoft Learn. I know that's a big old platform and lots of stuff, but it is fantastic because it's free to access. Anybody can go there. They can consume incredible content from the very beginning of like, what is cloud? What does that mean? All the way through to how do I start creating my own machine learning algorithms and kind of everything in between. And it is the perfect jumping off point for certification and building your skills and developing yourself around that technology. So I absolutely recommend that. And then on the Ignite announcements, I mean, it's hard to pick because I'm biased, and there's so much that we announced across the few days. But for me, it's the hybrid cloud and multi-cloud environment innovations that we announced. Things like Azure Virtual Desktop for Azure Stack HCI, and some of the capabilities to use things like Defender for multi-cloud scenarios. So recognizing that people have different investments in different cloud, whether it's hybrid with Microsoft or whether, as I say, it's multi-cloud with other cloud providers, I think we're making tremendous strides there to make it easier for people to manage those environments. So in fact, if I would encourage anybody to go and get the book of news, the summary of all the announcements, there's so much in there.
Brilliant. That's great. And thank you for joining us today, James. Pete, from your perspective, what was the one Microsoft Ignite announcement that stood out to you, and what's your one go-to Azure learning resource?
Yeah, so something that I really liked is the fact that Azure Arc is continuing to evolve, and now the fact that you're going to be able to manage your VMware vSphere environment, whether it's on-prem, through Arc is fantastic. Being single pane of glass is a slightly cliche term that we use it a lot, but having everything in that one place is really great. So that was really something which stood out for me, and definitely I shall be cheeky and go for two resources. So the first one is a Cloud Guru, which they've got a huge amount of learning available on all clouds, particularly Azure. Especially if you're working your way through with certifications, there will be courses designed to teach you everything you need to know to pass, which is great. And also on YouTube, a guy called John Saville, who is incredible with the amount of training that he churns out. No adverts, anything like that. He just does it for the enjoyment, and he is a fantastic resource. So definitely those two.
That's great. Fantastic, Pete. And Tom, over to you with the same two questions then. The one standout thing from Microsoft Ignite and your favorite learning resource when it comes to Azure.
Yeah, no problem. So for me personally, SQL Server 2022, specifically the integration with managed instances. Why? Because this supports migrations through to the use of distributed availability groups, which will enable near zero downtime for migrations, which is quite exciting. And in terms of my favorite Azure learning resources, it's quite a hidden resource. You have to dig quite hard into Google, but the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure, which we use here as pre-sales engineers at Inti, and I know the architects and the pre-sales and deployment teams use at Microsoft as well. So within there, you've got everything from strategy, planning, ready stage, adoption, governance, and managing. So just to give you a flavor, within the ready stage, you have setup guides, on-premise comparisons to Azure workloads. So for those customers and for those IT people that are coming from a on-prem background, like the majority of people do, you've got that direct comparison chart, flow charts, and so on so you can make those direct comparisons, which is always handy. So the Cloud Adoption Framework for me.
Brilliant. Fantastic, Tom. And last but not least, Ben. So what was the one standout announcement, and what's your go-to Azure learning resource?
Well, everything I was going to say has been stolen already, so I'll have to come up with something else on the fly. But from Azure, seeing some new virtual machine options available on the latest hardware. The thing that sort of stood out from a security perspective, they support things like secure enclaves, so you can do hardware-based encryption as well as the software-based that's already there. Everyone's security focused nowadays. It's good to see the option for that in the public cloud. The other thing that Pete's already touched on is obviously the hybrid work and the integration with an on-prem vCenter. In terms of other learning resources that haven't already been mentioned, I would say meetups in community groups as well are another good avenue to learn content, especially some of the user sessions that go on. They're a great way to meet people, and everyone puts time and effort in their own time to do learning and development, and seeing some of those sessions are really valuable, as well as the more formal training that's already been mentioned.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for joining today, Ben. So from my perspective, it's already been mentioned, sort of the evolution of Azure Arc, the ability to be able to interact with your vSphere infrastructure on premise was certainly a standout element from an Azure side. And to give a resource that hasn't yet been mentioned, I'm a real big fan of the Microsoft Pressbooks. When it comes to learning these subjects, I think it gives you something tangible in your hands that you can go through, make notes and look up. It's already been mentioned as well. John Saville, I know, Ben, you're a big fan, and also Pete as well, but I've spent many an hour kind of digging into the content he's got there. So that brings to the end our panel discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists and those of you that have watched this. There's plenty of sessions throughout the day all about Azure, all about that journey, and we've got the workshop at the end of the day. If you're watching this recording afterwards, feel free to reach out to your Computer World account manager. We're more than happy to have a conversation with you about how your journey will look inside your organization and how you can maximize the usage of the cloud. I hope you've enjoyed this panel session. We really look forward to seeing you on some of the other sessions here at Define Tomorrow.